right, welcome to Cafe Chronicles. Tonight I have the great M.L. Liebler. Thank you for doing this.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to know what kind of questions you'd ask me after all these years.
Me too.
I'm dying to know.
Yeah. I don't know where to start. Your career is so vast and all over the place, and I've known you for quite some time.
You have. Got to be over 30 years.
Oh, easily.
I mean, Pat Prouty was a little boy then.
I interviewed him.
I know.
On the podcast.
I saw it.
Yeah.
I watched it.
But you were I had a class with you. You were a professor at Wayne State.
Yep.
I think it was 60s culture.
Yeah,
or,
it was a class I thought up at the time, which was called Beats, Hippies, and Punks.
That's what it was.
And
yeah.
we looked at literature.
Yeah.
From those periods.
Yeah, you turned me on to like Kerouac and
yeah, we did.
Oh,
Ginsberg and then Kesey and the electric
Fantastic.
Kool-Aid acid test and
so you turned me on to Kesey, and then years later, I joined the Magic Poetry Band.
well, I remembered
with
you were a
you.
guitar player, but also
Yeah.
you worked in the English department. Didn't you do that before you were in my band?
Yes, I was doing their computer.
Yeah, you were there like a student
Computer
assistant.
lab. Yeah. But then years later, we played with Ken Kesey at Alvin's,
We did.
and he made fun of me
He did?
for noodling.
Oh, well, you know.
I had the guitar.
You
in
had
the
that
green
much
room,
acid and you're that old, you know.
and then he signed my Sometimes a Great Notion book.
Oh,
Yeah,
and he put to the noodler.
I think he put to Junk Baby.
Oh, maybe
You
so.
called me Junk Baby in that class. I think I wore a shirt.
No, you wore
No.
that on tour.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, we were in Bethesda, Maryland, in a hotel room.
Remember that?
I do. And you, me and Jim were sleeping, or we had just gotten up.
Jim Carrey, the drummer.
And you came back with coffee, so you got up earlier. And you had that Burroughs shirt on, which was the girl. What was her name?
Yeah, Teresa.
Therese.
Yeah.
You said it was her shirt, and it was just so perfect that you came in with a cup of coffee early in the morning with that shirt. So, and it said Junk Baby on it.
Yeah, it was, I think, William S. Burroughs sitting on a park bench.
Yeah,
And down the side said Junk Baby.
Junk Baby.
And ever since then, Justin, he's called me Junk Baby.
And it's
So-
really a misnomer because when you tell people that he's Junk Baby, or that's his nickname or whatever, they think automatically, oh, he's a heroin addict. No, he just had a T-shirt on that said Junk Baby. So then I became Smack Daddy.
Yeah.
Became a whole heroin thing.
So, because Smack Daddy, we were doing a gig in the Bronx, and we called him Smack Daddy, and there was a girl in the audience that said "Smack me, Daddy."
Smack me, Daddy.
No, but you would call me Junk Baby on stage.
I did.
We would get off the stage, and people would come up to me and say, "Junk Baby, can I get your autograph?"
Did you sign a Junk Baby?
I did a few times, I'm sure.
Well, I'd like to go back to that. Calling you Junk
Baby.
Yeah, I don't know. Brigitte didn't have a nickname, but of course.
Well, yeah, because you call her Brigitte, and that's not her name.
Well, I called her that in my class.
Bridget Knudsen, who's the bass player for the Magic Poetry
Band. Yeah. She was in my class in the 80s, and this is how my brain works. One, she was married then. I don't think she had a kid, but she was married, and she played bass. I remembered that. And I don't know if she probably didn't do anything because it was just intro. Mm-hmm. And so that might have been 88 or something like that. And I just remembered, oh, okay. And so when we started putting things together, and bass players were the hardest thing to usually find. Did you play with me at the University of Michigan when we did that with Tillinghast? I think you had to be at, we played, not Hill Auditorium, but another known place. It's the place I saw Phil Glass in like 81. It's another littler theater, but pretty big. And Tillinghast hooked it up because he was teaching at U of M. And he was so taken by magic poetry that he and his kid and some other cool musicians, I'm sure Jim knew them because they were Ann Arbor people, and they formed a band where he would read his poetry, and then the band would play music. But they played really interesting sort of, I don't know, Zappa-esque kind of music. It was pretty cool. And they made an album, and they were happy about that. So we had a program that had us. I'm thinking, weren't you in the band? You were in the band before Brigitte, weren't you?
In Magic Poetry?
Yeah.
I joined when it was Bill Blank on drums.
Right.
Matt Smith? Mike Smith? I don't remember his...
Well, Mike Smith was, and then there was Matt Nickery, but I don't think he played. No, Michael Smith, yeah.
Yeah. We went to Catskills with him.
Yes, we did. That's right. I just remember him saying at some point, I think we did a gig at Delta College. And
Saginaw?
Yeah, by Saginaw, because we were doing a lot of stuff up there. There's videos that I have from doing gigs. Did you ever do any up there with us? Yeah, didn't you play?
We did some with Sinclair.
And Country
John
Joe.
Sinclair and Johnson.
Weren't you there when he found a bindle of Coke in the matches?
We did one song with John Sinclair that lasted about 40 minutes. I swear to you, it was a 40-minute
And that's
jam.
what you have to worry about when you're organizing poetry events. You know, lead guitar players and poets. You can't get them off the stage. So anyway, we did this show there. The point of that, my little story, that's why I'm thinking you must have been there. I don't think Jim Carrey was playing drums at that point, but maybe he was. But we did our show, and then that's what happened. That Mike Smith on the way back, who played violin too.
Right.
He's on that first album. And on the way back, we're driving from northern Michigan or up there. And he just said, ML, I got to tell you, I have to say, I didn't want to be in a magic poetry band all my life. And my response was, why not? Because everyone was getting paid. No,
yeah.
But he had other things going on, although no one's ever heard of him since. So unless he's watching this podcast right now. But he was really good, and he was a great violin player and a good bass player. Yeah. But he just mentioned that to me, so I knew we needed a bass player. And then I went, bing, and I remembered Brigitte, and after that U of M show, I called or wrote her or however, I don't know if email existed back then.
Yeah.
But I got a hold of her somehow and asked her if she would play bass with the Magic Poetry Band.
Yeah. So the Magic Poetry Band is formed and reformed and deformed throughout the years, right? And many different,
Well, here's the quick story of it. I mean, at least initially. In the early 1980s, when I first got to Wayne State, Frank Paul, who has played here on my stuff anyway, he's kind of an avant-garde artist and pretty well known in that area. But at that time, when we first met, he was still part of a group, a punk group, punk new wave called Hype. And they won a Battle of the Band contest at WABX, which then wasn't the ABX I grew up with, but nonetheless. And it was at Harpo's or something. And they won, and the deal was that they got a 45 vinyl out of it. So, and he had a studio, and still has it, down in Wyandotte. So he said to me, started talking music. Then he saw me, before he really knew me, he saw me at a Kraftwerk show at Nitro's in whatever city. It's on the west side. I couldn't even tell you how to get there.
Nitro's.
Yeah, it was called Nitro. And Kraftwerk played there, which was an incredible show. They had all these mannequins in their place.
Yeah.
And when the music... boop, 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 and then the curtain opens, and there are mannequins standing behind the synthesizers and stuff. And then they finally came out and played. So anyway, he saw me there. I knew he was a musician. I had been doing music and poetry, but not with people. I started doing it in the early 70s when I was in college, and using tape or whatever, records, tape. I had a 4-track tape player someone gave us in our apartment. And
so you would play the music and then read over the...
I would, yeah. Okay. I would either, or I would play a guitar piece over and over and, on one track, and then go back and, read a poem and then add hitting a pizza tin, for percussion and, just screwing around like that. But my idea was like...
That's not Dadaism, is it?
Well, we kind of like... Our whole Ridgeway thing came out of Dada.
Yeah.
We started together as a group in 74, and everybody's still alive. In fact, we just met last night. We meet every 2 weeks on Zoom.
Really?
Yeah, everyone's alive. And there were 5 of us, and we started at Macomb College. And we were into that. Dada is like subversiveness, and we were anti-everything, I guess we were punk before punk. So Dada's anti-art, we were anti-art, we were anti-intellectual, still am, but we were more so then. And we put on an exhibit. I wrote a play. And it doesn't exist anymore because someone threw all the videotape. But Macomb had a 3-camera studio at that time. Nobody knows why, but they did. And the one guy from Ridgeway, Carl, he was really in as a student in that studio doing stuff. So he had access to the studio, and they had what was called a camcorder at the time, which was really like a reel-to-reel, but it was video that he could take out to use. Mm-hmm. So I wrote this 1-act play called Beneath Man's Integrity, which was really based on, or I drew inspiration from Eugene O'Neill's The Iceman Cometh. It was kind of this drunk, washed up Shakespearean actor. And anyway, we filmed it at a place I used to work at when I was a teenager. I still was a teenager, I guess, but when I worked there earlier washing dishes at Huck's Restaurant, which is really in the area. It's not there anymore, but it was right by your house. It's Fishbones now.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But they knocked down, Huck's was an expensive, hoity-toity, Grosse Pointe visited expensive restaurant that served gourmet food, like people you don't know, or probably don't know, but maybe George Perot used to have this travel show on Channel 4. He lived in Grosse Pointe. He came there all the time. He was so large that they had to put 2 chairs down for him to sit in. He was kind of like Alfred Hitchcock. He looked like that, kind of. But he was real popular on television.
Like the Monty Python skit?
Yeah. But he was real popular in Detroit. And he used to do his show, the travel show at the DIA once a month. And, George Perot presents or something. So anyway, he used to come there. Bill Kennedy used to live. You know his name? Mm-hmm. He used to live in Grosse Pointe. And he had a Mercedes, not a Mercedes. He had a Bentley. No, he had a Rolls Royce. And he would drive it up there, and they had car parkers at the time. And sometimes we would go out and smoke pot with the
valets.
Yeah, because they were able to get it for us. And back in those days.
What year is this?
This would have been in 69, 70. 71. I know I was working there. I remember that July 4th or 3rd when Jim Morrison died. That was 71. I remember going to work and hearing about that, which was kind of shocking because I'd seen the Doors in 68 at Cobo. And we also saw Jimi Hendrix there, as a matter of fact, which was incredible. We saw a lot of shows. And I started going to concerts. My first one was the Blues Magoos at Ford Auditorium. Do you remember Ford Auditorium?
I graduated from Ford.
Oh, did you? Pam did too.
We were the last class.
Oh, yeah.
Where they tore it down.
So they used to have good concerts there. Really, I mean, Pink Floyd used to play there all the time for whatever reasons. But so I saw the Blues Magoos. That had to be like, I must have been in junior high. But things were different then. My grandparents would drive me and my friends down. This happened for Hendrix and everything. And then you've seen it go by your place, but there's a Jefferson bus. And we would get the Jefferson bus out by Cobo Hall and then take it back to St. Clair Shores. And it would, I lived right off Jefferson, and we all did. So it would stop right at our street, So that became kind of common. Probably it wouldn't be safe for kids to do that nowadays or back in between. But when we went, we used to do that. Go down, they'd drive us, and we'd take the bus back, and that, and that was that. But anyway, so I started, doing a lot of concerts and that sort of going to them. And Jim Morrison was a big influence because I was writing poetry for a long time.
I was just going to ask, was his like spoken word? Is that what?
When I heard that is when I came out of the closet as a poet because, back when I grew up, you didn't go around talking to people and saying, oh, I'm a poet or I write poems. That would be like kind of, they would think less of you.
Really? I don't know why. I would think back then that was kind of like the...
No. Because one is, it was a different... And I grew up in like this working class situation, so nobody ever thought of it. Although the core of Ridgeway comes from my street, as it turns out. Yeah.
You lived on Ridgeway?
No, I lived on Lincoln.
Oh.
Ridgeway comes later when we went away to college. Greg went to MSU. Me and Jeff went to Oakland. Carl stayed at Macomb with this other friend of ours who was part of it. And they rented a house, like a one-bedroom shitty house. Can you say that on here? On Ridgeway. And they bought a little press, which was real cheesy. Mm-hmm. And Carl printed a little book of his. It was very tiny. And then they wanted to do one of mine. And that became, hey, the Ridgeway Press. And so that's how Ridgeway Press started in 1974. But we went away to college, and that's when somehow this 4-track thing turned up at our place. And I started thinking, nobody, and poetry readings then were nothing like now. Nobody went to poetry readings. You could have Allen Ginsberg at school and nobody would come.
There weren't coffee houses just jam-packed with...
No way, man. People didn't... Because the first thing I did when I got to Oakland is I formed a student organization, which was called Letters from Earth, based on Mark Twain's famous book. And and then got a little money from the student, council. And we started doing little readings there. We brought in the people who influenced us basically from Detroit. And that would have been like Chris Tisch. And I don't know if you know some of these names, but Donna Brooks was one. They all moved out to New York, and they're still there. But there were a number of poets, and that was the thing at Macomb. Macomb was a great school for us. We loved it. We loved going to school there because they had a series, poetry series there, and on that series, Robert Creeley read, Allen Ginsberg read, and only those of us kind of in the know, if I can say that, we understood that and went to all of these. Saw a great poet. He just passed away he was a friend of Pete Brown's, Michael Horowitz, famous London kind of beat poet. He came there, and I remember he read, and he had an accent, which was unusual, and he played a saxophone that was this big, and he would read these beatnik poems, and then he'd pull it out, and then he'd start rolling around on the floor. That's probably when I thought, I got to find Faruq.
Yeah.
So
yeah, Faruq Z.
So going back to this other story of how this, how this all started.
Yeah.
Is I wanted to do, I was doing music and poetry then. And I thought, I'm going to do this because people don't come to readings anyway. So let me try this method to see if I can get people to come. And, it sort of worked a little bit back in those times. It was a very dry time for poetry, I got to say. For example, Ridgway did a big art exhibit, reading, film, and all that at Oakland. And we set up in one of the rooms in the student center and stuff. And the students were so square, because now we're in the 74, 75 maybe. They were so square that they got really mad at the stuff that we had there, because it was all anti-art stuff. We had Ricky Nelson, Bring 'Em Back Alive on a lawn chair.
So you're full Dada.
Yeah, we're total Dada. And we were showing on a loop Unchien Andalou, the Andalusian dog. Yeah. We just showed the eye getting cut. They got really mad. They called public safety. They came and threatened to arrest us and told us we had X amount of minutes to clear out. So we had to pull the cars up and load everything back up again. And that happened at Macomb too. We were doing an anti-art show in the spring, and all these people would sit on the lawn that was there at the time. And so we had all our stuff set up, and then we started going around the whole thing with ribbon. And we tied everybody in, and they got really mad about that. They started breaking our art and breaking the pottery. And they chased us out of there too. And that happened to us at Michigan State as well. We went up there, just took a room over and started setting up stuff. Nobody was around. It was a Saturday. And again, the police came and said, "What are you guys doing?" We said, "Oh, we're doing an art show." "Not here, you aren't," So we had to load back up and leave again.
So did you do anything before the Magic Poetry Band with music that wasn't necessarily?
Just with recorded music.
Okay.
I mean, I used Ornette Coleman, I used the Chieftains, I used, that kind of stuff.
Were you steadily writing poetry?
Oh, yeah. I started doing that when I was really young, not knowing what I was doing.
Okay.
It wasn't like, I was raised by my grandparents. They were just working class people. I don't think they graduated high school. I'm sure they didn't. And so poetry wasn't even part of our reality. I don't know. I just started scribbling things down, and then some of them were in my little books with those big fat pencils and stuff. And then I'd get in trouble for that. They'd say, "Well, Michael wrote in his book again, and we don't understand this." And so, but I just know I was doing that. I was writing in the margins, whatever. It couldn't have been any good. In fact, I wrote a lot of stuff for a lot of years from the age of 7 on that I would just always write and throw it in a box. When the box filled up, I'd tape it shut with duct tape, which I still have.
You still have? I was just going to ask. You still
have those?
I do have
them. I do, but I've never looked at it. I don't want to. I never liked going back and looking at my stuff anyway.
Yeah.
And back then it wasn't, I mean, it wasn't that good.
So I have a question. When you write your poetry, do you have something in mind when you sit down to write, or do you, come up with an idea, or do you find like if there's a phrase pop in your head, or do you feel the need to write about something, or do you have like a weird?
I think of writing from my perspective like like I'm painting. So it, being from the surrealist Dada movement early on, I just write whatever I'm thinking, feeling, whatever. And I don't have any, like a lot of those poems that we're doing now, some of them are old. I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to write a poem about being drunk. I'm going to write a poem about Kent State. I didn't think like that back then. Excuse me. I didn't think like that back then.
More stream of conscious?
Yeah, kind of. But in the end, it means something. But I don't really know what it means per se. Sometimes I'll write a poem and it's, clearly a poem, an anti this or that poetry poem or something. But generally when I write, like a lot of those poems, like this, the Miss Spirit of everything that we're doing, I just wrote that.
Like when you write a poem, if you're writing about something or the way things sound, it's because I wanted to ask you, when we're writing together and I have something or we play a piece of music, are you thinking in your head how the music makes you feel when you're looking for a poem to fit?
Yeah, and it's certain music, and fortunately a lot of the stuff that you've written over the years is, I say this, I've said this before, even with working with some famous musicians, I don't want to just work with famous musicians. They have to in some way speak to me poetically. Country Joe did that, ironically. I don't think people would imagine that. Peter Lewis did that, actually. Yorma did that. Certain things that they do with the music, it has to me, I say it has to have a poetic sensibility for me to do it. I did do a piece with Dick Wagner before he died at that cool blues place out by the Silverdome, Callahan's.
Oh, yeah.
He played there before.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah. So he had me come up, and I did London with him. Now, that kind of thing, I can do that. Blues, what I find with blues, and that's how it is even with like what we did with Ballad of Birmingham, any poem that rhymes anyway, which that one does, I can make work in a poem. I mean, if it's by someone else. I don't write those kind of poems, but if it is, I could do that without necessarily having a poetic sensibility about Dick Wagner's work.
Yeah.
Now, I've loved Dick Wagner. I saw him when I was 15 for the first time in St. Clair Shores. So I've been, a fan of that whole kind of Detroit music stuff back then. Rationals and all those guys, have seen them all. Amboy Dukes used to be good. I loved them. Their first 2 albums anyway.
Them, the band, them?
Oh, I loved them too. Yeah, but I mean, Amboy Dukes.
Yeah.
I liked Amboy Dukes. I saw them. They played live when I must have been 14 or 13 on the stage. They played on the steps of the library. They used to have free concerts. WABX was a freeform radio station then, and they would put on free concerts either on the steps of the library down, by Wayne, which I didn't even know that was Wayne, because I would take the Jefferson bus to Woodward and walk down to the library. I thought, in the end, I was born there too.
Yeah.
I was born right next to the Historical Museum. That was a hospital. It was a small hospital that the doctor who delivered me, who was our family doctor, owned. So when my birth mother was going to give birth to me, she had, if I'm going to deliver it, we got to do it at my hospital, So at that time, I was conceived in Roseville, but I don't remember it, of course, but had to drive down here. And I didn't know that either. I knew the hospital was called Art Center, and I just knew that. But I didn't get it was in the Art Center. I just thought a guy named Art must have owned it. Maybe my doctor's name was Art Center.
Wow.
I really didn't know it. But so when I used to come to those concerts there, and I saw the Amboy Dukes, Brownsville Station, Third Power, Frost, all those bands. And then they used to do them at what was called Tartar Field, which is now, the football field.
Yeah.
They call it something else now, Warrior Land.
By 94?
Yeah. And so they used to do shows there as well, free concerts. Free concerts were a thing, which doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, I know. Because the reason I was asking you about the fitting the poems to the music, because as a songwriter, I think the perfect song with lyrics is a song that the words fit the music fits the words in terms of how it feels.
Yeah, no, I totally get that.
Yeah,
because when I was young, I wanted to be able to write poems that were based on sound, like the word. I made words up because I liked the way that and I wanted to be a poet that wrote that way. I just wanted to ultimately get to the point where I wrote poems that express things, but without real words.
Yeah.
It didn't really, that aspect of my career never took off, but maybe there were a few early poems back in the early Ridgeway days like that. But so I understand that. Yeah. And so I just listen, like Leaning into In the Sunlight that you wrote. That's very poetic to me. That's a poetic sensibility. And I listen to it and then I, kind of thumb through my stuff to see what would fit. And sometimes poems like that start out with a different poem. It doesn't quite work. And then I hit on the right one, which in this case is I'm Not Writing Any Elegies, which is an older poem. In fact, all of those except the Miss Spirit is in my most recent book. But that's an example. If you look at the words to Miss Spirit, I mean, it doesn't really, I don't know what it means. You know what I mean? It's like an abstract painting.
Because it always works, like when you do that. And I know this, that sometimes you change it,
I do.
Like midway.
Yeah.
But it's always like, and the way you fit the words, and it always comes around to like really like working out.
Well, I think what's happened with that is, well, I'll go back real quick to the story of getting more formal with the music thing with Frank Paul. Mm-hmm. So Frank lived in the New Center area, and I was, I was part of a reading series at Wayne State. It probably was still going when you were there, the colloquium series. It was like noon on Wednesdays or something. Were you ever in the English department when we were over in State Hall?
No.
Okay. Well, it started there, and then we
51 War, and
then we moved it there. It ran about 20 years. But at any rate, I always did. Everybody in the department would do a reading on it, and then I started branching out and inviting, Jim Gustafson and Ken Michalowski and John Sinclair and other people to come and participate in it. But I was going to do a reading. Frank and I had gotten to know each other. He was like you. The only difference is, when I started teaching at Wayne, I was probably only 3 years older than him. He was the youngest guy I knew there. Everybody was really old, and they were squares. They didn't know anything. But Frank was into music. I was into music, and we found out we were into the same thing, which would be craft work and Ralph. Are you familiar with Ralph Records? That's where the Residents came out of, and Fred Frith and all those.
Fred Frith, yeah.
All those guys came out of Ralph Records, which was this kind of weird label. Anyway, so
Michigan?
No.
In Michigan? Oh.
No. I think San Francisco. So, we bought everything by the Residents and Fred Frith and Snakefinger, and they were all the Art Bears. They were all on that label. And Frank was really getting into that too. He was moving away from the alternative music or new wave music to that. And he had this studio. So I said, let's do a thing together. These people don't know what you can do. And I want to do poetry and music. Let's do that. And he was happy and hip to it. And he played keyboards. He could play a synthesizer and that kind of stuff. He could play guitar too. He can play everything, tuba. So we did that reading together at Wayne. And people liked it, and we both liked it. And so he said, come down. Why don't you think in terms of, we did some shows together, like at Cobb's Corner and various places. Eventually, though, it did get to the point where Frank said, look, I'm trying to have a career too. I can't be running all around doing shows with you. Why don't we go in the studio and make a cassette of us doing our thing, and then you can take your cassette player and go out and and play us.
Then, yeah.
So I did that for a long time too. But then in the course of that, he said, well, why don't you come down and make a record? And I said, oh, okay. He said, at readings, you can sell, at the time, cassettes. And instead of books, sell cassettes at your readings. And that's kind of a cool idea. So I went down there. This must have been about like 85. I went down and we started working using, him and his group as the backup group. What are they called now? They're still playing around somewhere, but and then they went off the deep edge with avant-garde stuff. But at the time, I went down and I started cutting tracks that we had already done, but making a record of it, reading to it. I met Faruq Z. Well, first, before Faruq, I was going to do a reading in Canada, in Windsor. There was a thing that started at the DIA that they did every year, once a year. It was a week of readings featuring Canadian writers and American writers. I mean, famous writers, like the Four Horsemen were part of that from Canada. Al Purdy, who was kind of a really well-known Canadian guy. And then he'd have like Lawrence Ferlinghetti and some readings would be at the DIA and some would be at the Art Institute in Windsor. So I got booked onto that. And as that was kind of coming together, the guys in the layabouts, they say, hey, we want to play with you. And I go, really? Oh, okay. What do we do? So they started playing with me, the Franklin brothers. Eventually we added Mel Rosas and Gerard Smith, who was an acting student, but a really good guitar player. I think he was in a group called Kooper. Did you ever know them?
Kooper?
There's a picture of me that's going to be in the book, the memoir, that I'm wearing a Kooper shirt that Dean handmade all the shirts. And they're all different, but they're...
Dean Western?
Yeah, they're like paint on a shirt.
Huh.
It's pretty good. And Dean was in it, Bill Boyer wasn't, but he was in the blanks. And and then we all rehearsed at that funeral home there. That's where Bill lived and Dean lived and all that kind of stuff. So they said, we want to play with you. And I said, cool, okay. So I was on a program over there with actually Al Purdy and Diane Wachowski. That's when I first met them, or her, which I am still friends with. And we did the first thing. It wasn't called Magic Poetry. It wasn't called anything. It was just me reading with some musicians. And so those guys really liked it. And I said, well, I'm going to make an album. Frank had already suggested that. You guys want to be on it? And they were like, yeah. Somewhere in between there, I met Faruq. Now, I'd known Faruq since I was a kid. Faruq, I'm not a jazz person per se, but Faruq Jazz or Art Ensemble of Chicago or Ornette Coleman.
You knew like Griot Galaxy?
Yes, Griot Galaxy. I liked that. I like that. If I'm going to listen to jazz, I like that kind of jazz, kind of space sage, whatever.
But you knew Faruq before he was in Griot?
No, not before. He had been in Griot, and I was at Wayne, and he was in a really horrific motorcycle accident. He was a biker. And when I first met Faruq, he had really long dreadlocks. He didn't look like you ended up knowing him looking like. And he was a biker. He had a Harley Davidson in parts in his basement and that. But he had been in a really bad motorcycle accident. It was big news, the front page of the South End, Faruq Z. And he was in a coma for a long time. And they were going to pull, he told me this later, but they were going to pull the plug because it had been months with no activity. And just as they were going to do that, he came out of it. But he had to relearn to play. He had to relearn everything. He had to relearn how to play the saxophone. And at some point, and he was drinking then too, obviously people with head injuries like that get very depressed. And so he was drinking. But we met And I'd already, he was already a hero of mine. I'd seen Griot Galaxy, and in particular, Faruq was sort of the ML Liebler of that outfit. He was the guy in front, and he dressed really. They all did, but he dressed very. They wear paint on their faces. We should think about that too. I remember seeing him at a place on Woodward, and he was playing, and he's playing, and they had all their makeup and all their stuff on. It was 9 in Woodward, I remember. It was a place called Delta Lady. And he jumped off the stage and kept playing, walked out the front door, still playing. You could still hear him playing. And then he came back in through the kitchen playing and got back on the stage. And I just thought, oh, yeah, I dig that. That's my kind of thing.
So
this was before the accident.
Yeah.
And then he had that accident. He was in the coma. Anyway, we met. I remember we were having a long conversation on the phone. This must have been early in our friendship. The night that plane crashed at Metro. There was a big,
oh, yeah.
Because I was talking to him on the phone, and I saw it on TV. I said, "Hey, Faruq, there's been a big plane crash," and we kept talking and watching the news and that sort of thing. So anyway, I brought him in the studio. So I brought the layabouts in the studio. Then I brought Faruq into the studio, and then I wanted because I wasn't that old then. I was like 25 or something like that. So I was totally down with punk, new wave, whatever. I was very familiar with the SST bands, the Minutemen, and all that kind of stuff. And so were actually Dean. In fact, a lot of the SST bands like Black Flag and they stayed with them. Back in those days, Mike Watt still does that. He stays with some people over by my house when he comes through town from back in those early days. But they preferred that. I prefer a hotel room myself, but they preferred sleeping on floors and shit like that. So,
did you cut an album?
Yeah. So we cut a record. What the hell was that record? Oh, it was called Breaking the Voodoo. So we did it it was done on a reel-to-reel. And I got too many of these stories. You're going to have to read my book, but this is all in there. But so we go cut it on reel-to-reel. We go to and Ken Gay Zola's show on WDET. Sunday night. It was a real popular show. And we bring the reel-to-reel, me, Faruq, and the Franklin brothers. And they were playing cuts from it on the reel-to-reel. Remember, that was like, what is it, Tails Out or some language. So, you can bring it, but it's got to have Tails Out. So anyway, we did. And while it was playing, people started calling on the phone going, "Hey, what is that? Who is that?" And she looked at me and said, "People are asking who is this group?" And that's when I came up with that name, which was based on me seeing Captain Beefheart at the East Town when I was 17 and flipping me out. And so I just said, "A Magic Poetry Band." Tell them it's a magic.
Oh, see, I didn't know it was just off the cuff like that.
It was totally off the cuff because his band was the Magic Band.
Right. I knew that part of it, but I didn't know somebody called you up and said.
No, they called the station.
Yeah.
And then they said, "Where are they playing?" And again, I said to these guys, I said, they want to know where we're playing. Do you guys want to have a band? And they go, "Oh, yeah." Like all you musicians want to play all the time. So I said, okay then, and they various ones had been in and out of the studio on this first CD, so they were on it. It wasn't anything like what we. I mean, it wasn't that good.
Can you get that album?
I have it on tape.
Yeah.
I don't know if Frankie put it. Well, the follow-up album I really like. That's when Faruq started to really shine.
You should get that tape to me. I can get it.
I know you can. Well, I have it. Yeah. I have tapes of it. We sold quite a few of them. We had him done at that, you know, the guy in your band, Chip Kip.
Yeah.
He works at Ross Music or something.
Yeah.
That's where we'd have our tapes done. I'd go out. And then he ended up playing for a while in the Magic Poetry Band.
Oh, I didn't know that.
We became, you know, really kind of popular.
Yeah.
And now let me think at that. I stopped drinking in 87. And we really didn't become the Magic. I mean, we became the Magic Poetry Band, but we really didn't become known, as I think I told you, until I stopped drinking. That's when everything took off. And I mean, I didn't plan it that way. It just, thank God, it happened, and I don't miss it. But that was the kind of thing. Is then everybody wanted the Magic Poetry Band, and then I ended up on the cover of Metro Times. I think that was the first time.
You're on a couple times, right?
I've been on it like 4 or 5 times now, in hindsight. But
because you were in some with Army gear or something, didn't you come back?
Oh, yeah. That was another time I was in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
I couldn't bring the band though.
Oh.
Although I did turn those kids on to, you know, certain stuff. They never heard of the Beatles. They didn't know anything about Motown, but. Yeah. One kid at this music school, he had this weird string instrument. And he started, so I got them all playing their instruments, their weird instruments.
Did you read over the instrument?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, but this one guy was really playing, and I go, hey, man, you're like the Jimi Hendrix of Kabul. And they were like, Jimi Hendrix? Yeah, they knew Jimi Hendrix, which was interesting, but nobody else, you know. So, anyway. So that's kind of what happened. And then, Sam's Jams record store.
Sure, I remember.
It used to have a Friday night show. They booked us. That's how I met Dave Dixon. He was our MC because he was friends with Sam. And I mean, he was, again, my hero because back then you could listen to the radio and you would get an education because they could play whatever they wanted.
Right.
And even better than XM radio. And they would blend stuff together and odd stuff and maybe folk into Hendrix, into classical, into... So anyway, Dave had the morning show, and Jerry Green did, but he came on in the afternoon, and I just learned so much from him. He was really my music mentor. I mean, I still love... many of the old songs that he used to play. One I'll just mention that whenever I hear it, it sends me back in time. It's Boz Scaggs, Duane Allman playing guitar on Loan Me a Dime. We should do that song. We used to do it in Coyote Monk.
On Loan Me a Dime?
Yeah, do you know that song? Listen to it. It's very long, and it's a blues.
Yeah.
And that was the kind of thing I thought, oh, okay, I never heard of Boz Scaggs before. Never heard of any, a lot of these people I was getting turned on to. So they were real educators. So that's when Dave and I became friends. And then I was on his radio shows. He called me Detroit's cultural czar. So I would do weekly literary art event things.
Like call-ins or like?
Yeah, well, or in the studio, but call-ins a lot. I did one when we were playing up in, I don't know if you were there. We were playing up in Woodstock at the Tinker Street Cafe. No, Bill Boyer was drumming then.
We were in Woodstock, but I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, this was where Dylan started. He lived up above the Tinker Street Cafe. But I had to, and a couple of guys, Bill knew that, Boyer. He knew they were from that African-American punk group. They're real famous. I mean,
Death?
No, not from Detroit.
Oh.
There's been a doc on them, too. Bad Brains? Is that it?
Is it Bad Brains?
Bad Brains. Yeah. The two of them moved up to Woodstock. So they were in the audience, and Bill knew them because he would go see them at, punk clubs and stuff. And they came, and they seemed to enjoy it and stuff. But I had to go in the kitchen because it was a Saturday, and that's when I had to call Dixon show. So I did a live report from the Tinker Street kitchen of things that were upcoming and literary stuff in Detroit and all that sort of thing.
You want to be the culture czar for Cafe Chronicles?
Sure.
You can call in, you know.
Oh, yeah.
We can do remotes from, you know.
Sure.
Hop on the
I
laptop.
would just, tell all the literary stuff that was going on at that time. Dixon died in 98 or something like that. So the culture czar ended at that. But so anyway, that's how it can. Is he still picking? Are you still picking me up? Okay.
It'd be better if you talked into the mic.
Okay.
There you go.
I got to sit up.
So, hey, Cafe Chronicles, it's called Cafe Chronicles.
Yes.
Because we want to chronicle the cafe.
Yeah, sure.
So,
it's a great idea.
Do you have a memory of being in the cafe? Like something, like a show you've seen or one of the performances at the cafe that sticks out? Recall.
Well, one show in particular stands out in my mind because I just thought it was really great. It was probably a real pain to put on. But remember you had Mitch Ryder here, and we came to that. So
in the cafe.
In the cafe, yeah. And that was a good show. I really enjoyed it. It was pretty packed in here, as I recall.
Yeah.
And then
that was early cafe days. That was.
Oh yeah. That was before it became what it has become. And then another one was two. One is when you had us on, or Judy Adams had us on her. Wasn't that show? Whatever it's called there.
The Discovery Series?
Yeah, wasn't it also aired on WLLZ or something like that?
No, she did. It was aired Sunday nights on the channel in Windsor.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Well, I know she went over there, but
whatever that
at
station
first it
is,
was on that jazz station. I don't know if it's still a jazz station.
JZZ?
Yeah, it was on that. But we did it, and that was the Magic Poetry Band version that had Ron English in it.
Mm-hmm.
And Faruq and Bill Hewlett, who really is a jazz drummer, and Jeff Reynolds and myself. That was pretty memorable.
Jeff,
and that was a good show. And then the time that we kind of, after Faruq had passed away, we did a show. You, I think, were part of it too, because it seems like we had 100 musicians up on the stage. And Showtime Johnny played the Faruq part, and we did Deliver Me. That was really special too. Now, that may have been Coyote Monk as the backup band, but he joined us. And remember Professor Aguirre from the English department?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, it turns out he's like a piano player.
Yeah.
So we had him on piano.
I remember that. Yeah.
So
I'm thinking back,
and Frankie was there.
We did a lot of shows because we did a couple shows with Louis Resto on piano.
Yes.
Where we did. Forget, but we did one of my pieces. I think we did Beneath the Grand Heaven.
Oh, we did do that. Yeah. We did that here with Ron and everybody.
Yeah.
Well, that album that we did, that someday is coming out on vinyl, they say.
Paper Ghost Rain Dance.
Yes. Yeah. That was Louis Resto's studio. Did you know that? That was Don Was in Louis Resto's studio.
Monster? Was it called Monster?
Maybe it was. It was that one on 14 Mile.
Yeah. Dean Western engineered, right?
He worked for them, but it was Louis and Don Was' studio.
I knew it was Louis, but I didn't know John was.
Yeah. They were partners.
Yeah.
And they still are, really, because, he's in that, that's a group you should have at the cafe.
Oh, Pan African Ensemble?
Have you been looking into that?
Oh, they're fantastic, though.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I've heard
I know
them.
all those guys.
And I
Dave McMurray's in it. And
yeah. And Dave McMurray wanted to do something with us too.
Great guy.
Yeah, no, he's a real deadhead, which is so cool.
Well, he had he did an album,
couple of them.
Yeah.
And then I've gotten to know Don because Sinclair. I don't know why he doesn't have us on his Motor City thing, but he should. If you're listening, Don, to the Chronicles. But he finally had Faruq on, which I was really happy about before he passed away. But you know what I'm talking about.
You're talking about the Concert of Colors?
Yeah, he does that Detroit thing. So anyway, I got to know him.
I thought we played that one year.
We did, but we played the Scarab Club, I think.
Yeah.
We didn't.
It was a while ago, but
this was before Don was doing his Motor City thing. But I have gotten to know him, and he works with a band that I really enjoy, which is Bob Weir. He's one of the Wolf Brothers. Mm-hmm. And now they've added horns and strings, and they do shows. They're called the Wolf Pack, and they're fabulous. So I had a great conversation with Don Was back when we were doing Sinclair's book, because Sinclair wanted a blurb from him. So I called him up and we got it, a nice blurb from him. And then had a couple of conversations about, because I'm a Bob Weir of Deadhead. Mm-hmm. I also knew that he went to visit Al Kooper and he was a big fan of Al Kooper's, and we were talking about Al Kooper, and he just told me, he said, yeah, that's what I'd like to model myself after, which is Al had his hand, Al was an A&R man, he was a side man, he made his own records, and so he said that's the kind of career that I'm trying to build. It's kind of an Al Kooper career. So at some point, it was a little bit before I had visited Al in Somerville, and Don Was came and visited, had dinner with him at his house, because he doesn't come out or anything like that.
Well, I had Al Kooper booked in the cafe.
I know, he's so hard to. That show, I helped him actually create the show that he would have had here.
Yeah.
Because I invited him to Detroit in the late 90s. I'd always been an Al Kooper fan. There's a chapter in my book about that. But I'd always been a fan of Al Kooper's. I don't know why, but he
doesn't fly or something, right?
No, he does. He doesn't like to. He doesn't like.
Why wouldn't he come then? I forget what.
It was something came up, and
he doesn't travel in the winter or something.
I think that. Yeah. Well, because one time he traveled in the winter, and his wife called me, and they were having a huge snowstorm in Boston, and they had to land. He was coming back from Japan. His band had played in Japan, and they landed in Detroit because there's a direct flight from Tokyo to Detroit, which I've done several times too. So I know about that flight. But it happened, it was snowing here, but it was a blizzard there. They couldn't go to Boston. So his wife called and said, can you go pick Al up? Can he spend the night at your house? Because now we were good friends at that point anyway, but that was part of it. So that whole winter thing spooked him. Mm-hmm. And Boston really gets snowed in when it gets snowed in, because I was there once with him. And I was there for a week, I think it was, but it snowed and I couldn't even do anything there because I was planning to go out to record stores and do stuff. And I couldn't even get out of the house. So that's all right. He's got a lot of history to tell you about.
Maybe he can do the podcast.
He could.
We can do it remotely.
Unless he's like now, I'm too old. He kind of just beats himself up a little too much, I think. Yeah. But when he first came to Detroit,
he was a really nice guy when I talked to him.
No, he's a great guy. He can be not a great guy to people, but to me he's fine. I enjoy it because he's got so much music history. You can name anybody, and he's had a connection to it. Jimi Hendrix gave him a guitar. He's got that kind of stuff at his house, And Ray Charles gave him something that he produced a Ray Charles TV special. So he did all that kind of stuff. But, and then he used to do a birthday show every year at B.B. King's in New York. And I'd go in for that. And that was always pretty interesting and pretty cool. He kind of did his whole career. But when he first came here, his book had just come out. And that's how I got a hold of him. He was teaching at Berkeley then, and I got a hold of him there and talked to him and said, hey, I run this writer's voice. Come on in and read from your book and sign some books. Come in as an author. And he said, okay. And then as we got closer to it, he decided, why don't we do a show, like a one-man show, and where and he did at Elvin's, and it was packed. It was just packed. I mean, it was free because we
Like
it was
music or
him on his Korg 88.
Huh.
That was the thing. Wherever he went, you had to have a Korg 88, and it had to have the control up on here because he can't. He is legally blind now, but he can't see pedals so he has to be able to do it with his hand. So he said, if you can get that, I'll do some songs. Okay.
When was that?
Elvin's.
When was it?
Oh, this was 98 at Elvin's. And some hip kids here, and he has it still in his house because I just saw it there. We were there a couple summers ago. And but some kids here, hipsters, they did, a handmade, not handmade, but hand-printed poster for that show. And he still has it hanging in his room there at home. So that's what he did. He came and he would, tell some stories about Blood, Sweat, and Tears or the Blues Project, and then he would play a song from them. And it was like a 2-hour thing that he did. A little too long for me, but I'm like, wrap it up, Al.
Yeah.
And then I probably shouldn't say this, but there was
say it.
There was Elvin's backstage.
Yeah. That's where Ken Kesey made
where
fun
Ken
of me.
Kesey was. How can you forget?
Right.
And you were probably drinking that night.
Oh yeah,
and
I'm sure I was.
And you still were hurt by it. But Kesey,
I didn't say I was hurt.
No.
I just said he was making fun of me.
Yeah, that sounds like him. But he's a real nice guy too. We became good friends, stayed in touch, and then surprisingly, shockingly, I should say, he died. Because he wanted to come back. I think he said that. I think this must have been 99 or something like that we did that. Because he said, in the year 2000, we're going to meet back here again and do the same thing. And he died before that. Could happen.
Maybe.
Because he'd had a stroke before that. He had a stroke, and he read up about strokes, so he knew he was having one and at home in Eugene. And so he, got to the hospital right away and was, saved from it. But then, after our thing here and stuff, he died. But shortly thereafter, at any rate. So, but anyway, we're backstage, and there was this female reporter who was really drunk, and fairly cute, and she's back there glomming all over Kooper because she's someone you know of too. But she was in a band, and she wanted, she thought Al Kooper can produce her or something, but she was really drunk. And at that time, I was not talking to the newspapers because they were on strike. So, to me, she was a scab, but, and drunk. And so I kind of
Drunk scab. So,
I shepherded her. She goes, "You won't even talk to me," or something like that. And I said, "No, because you're a scab." And anyway, we're friends now, but and she's sober. So, but I shushed, kind of got her out of the back room, and then on the way home, Kooper said, "One thing I got to tell you, ML, don't ever do that again. When there's a young, good-looking blonde fawning over me, don't step in." And I said, "Al, he's married, or he was getting married," because I sent him a wedding gift. Me and Pam did. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, hey, ML.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
You have any?
Did we learn anything?
We did.
No, I know.
Do you have any readings or anything you want to promote coming up?
Well, yeah, and I mean, we have we're going to, with the Magic Poetry Band, we're going to play in Lansing. I hope you remember that.
Okay.
On May 8th, I believe, at the library in Lansing or East Lansing. And then there's going to be, we're not doing it necessarily, but there's going to be an all-access cafe on June 20th on the east side with Ed Hirsch and others, and then we're going to do with Ed and some other people, the Lit Fest, which I'm probably going to need to
in St. Clair Shores.
Rent your
Blossom Heath?
Yes.
All right.
I have to rent your. I was going to try to have us on it, but see, I don't want to be funny about that stuff. I do. I feel funny about putting us on things that I'm on. Because
it's understandable.
Yeah, but I know you guys like to play, and I certainly like to be with you. Enjoyable group. It's great to be back with you and Brigitte. Because those were fun times. I mean, they were maybe more fun for you because I was sober then, but we had a lot of laughs, man.
And have more laughs.
I know. That's what I think, too. Yeah.
All right, ML Liebler.
Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for doing this.